talking about strategies for optimizing your R01 timeline. So if you're new around here, I'm Sarah Dobson. I am a research grant consultant, and I help early career researchers get funded at NIH. So let's talk about optimizing your timeline. First of all, a lot of PIs that I work with and speak to don't really have a solid plan for writing their R01. And the reason that I know that is because we talk a lot around here about binge writing, right? You kind of drop everything at the last minute and you spend the last 3 to 4 weeks just going all out and trying to get this grant out the door. And of course, that doesn't lead to particularly great results most of the time. And so the idea is to create a better plan and a more structured timeline for your writing so that it can be incorporated into your daily, weekly, monthly professional life, right? Instead of dropping everything at the last minute, binge writing, burning yourself out, and then having to recover from that and sort of pick up all the pieces, right? That's what we're trying to avoid. So what can you do to sort of optimize that process to not only get yourself better results with your grant, but also just feel more relaxed and in control of the process? Number one, and this will not surprise you at all if you have watched anything that I've done or been in my world for any amount of time, you need to start early. Okay, you need to start way earlier than you think you do, especially if you are new to writing R01s. And this applies to any other type of grant as well, right? The first time that you are writing a new type of application, there's a learning process in terms of how it actually all comes together. And so not only are you trying to get your research idea down on paper, you're also trying to navigate the guidelines and the eligibility criteria and all of the details that are required to submit a complete application, right? And that in and of itself is a project. And so you're essentially doing two projects at once, usually more than that, especially if you think about it in the context of your other work, right? So giving yourself more time acknowledges, first of all, that you are new to this and you are doing multiple things at once, but it also gives you time to recover and adjust if things go sideways, and they very often do, right? So giving yourself more time is going to be beneficial for a number of reasons, and it is always going to be the first place to start in terms of getting yourself better results on your R01. I will never stop yelling about this. Okay, number one. Number two is to do your strategic homework. Okay, and I kind of divide this into two camps. The first camp is the basic homework that you need to do around eligibility and guidelines and scoring criteria and all of those sort of check boxes that you need to complete to be able to get your application out the door and into NIH. And that stuff is pretty standard. And the more of these grants that you write, the more familiar you'll become with all of them. But just make sure that you're doing that basic strategic homework right off the bat. But the other piece of it is the competitive strategic homework that you need to do, right? And that falls more in the category of alignment with your target funding institute, alignment with potential study sections, and any other work that you need to do to consider how you're going to frame your application so that it is going to be as competitive as possible. And so all of that needs to be done really before you start diving into the writing, to prepare yourself and to make sure that you're not wasting your own time writing a grant that, first of all, you're not eligible for, or that you don't really have a good chance of being successful with, right? So all of that needs to come first. Okay. Step number 3 is the big one. It's develop a timeline with milestones, right? So, and there are different components to this that we'll talk about a little bit later, but developing a timeline means that you are working backwards from the deadline. And usually this is your institution's internal set of deadlines, not the actual submission deadline to NIH, because there's usually a lot of hoops you have to jump through in your own institution before it actually goes into NIH. So make sure that you're working backwards from a deadline that is going to make sure that you have everything you need to comply with any requirements at your own institution first, right? So you're working back from that deadline, and you are setting milestones along the way that will help you gauge your progress and help you adjust if things go sideways, right? So you're breaking down this massive project into smaller parts and finding those milestones along the way to know whether you're on track or off track. And that is really going to help you sort of pace yourself and make sure that you have everything that you need. And one of the big questions I always get here is like, how long should I expect things to take? Or how am I supposed to know how long it's going to take? And there are lots of different ways to answer this question, but the best answer I have for you is as long as you give it, right? And I don't mean, give yourself 6 months to write an Ames page, although that's probably not a terrible idea. But what I mean is a lot of times we can trick ourselves into thinking that something just takes longer and it sort of expands to fill the time that we give it, right? That's something that we know happens quite frequently. But what you can do, at least when you are drafting something or in the early stages of developing something, is just give yourself a set amount of time. Just say, I'm going to give myself X amount of time to complete this part of the grant, and we'll just see where we're at. I will, that's the amount of time I have. That's what it's going to get. And you may find that it will get you a lot further than you think if you just kind of throw up your hands and say, like, I don't know how long this is going to take. And it just expands to fill sort of an infinite amount of time that you give it, right? And obviously this is, I think, a big reason why people end up binge writing is because they are constrained in that way by that deadline. And so they just churn everything out as quickly as possible because they've come up really close to what the deadline actually is. But there is a fine balance between binge writing and giving yourself too much time, or not putting guardrails around how much time different parts of the application are going to take. And that's something that you will have to figure out over time. But I do encourage you to just experiment with giving yourself a set amount of time to write a piece of the application and see how that goes. And the thing that will really facilitate that is the next point, which is about eliminating distractions, right? So, and this can be sort of micro and macro distractions. So the micro distractions are, your email and the things that you leave open and all the notifications that you get as you're trying to focus on a piece of writing or a piece of your grant, right? So those are the micro distractions. The macro distractions are all of the pieces that you put on your plate that are taking your attention away from this grant that you are submitting, right? And obviously, in any person's academic life, there are going to be lots of different responsibilities and obligations and requirements, but you have a lot more control over this than you think you do in terms of how you prioritize your time and your schedule and your attention and your capacity. And so when we think about minimizing those macro distractions, you want to think about how you are focusing that time and energy and capacity and attention on what really matters to you. And if, developing your program of research and getting your projects funded is really important to you, you need to make sure that that is prioritized in your schedule and in your calendar. So minimizing distractions, both on the micro and the macro level, are going to allow you to exists within those boundaries that you put on the amount of time that something will take for you to write. Again, something to experiment with and develop over time. The next piece of advice on maximizing your timeline is to seek feedback. And so I just want to go back for a second to the actual timeline and remind you that it's not just, you don't just want to make sure that you're mapping out the time it's going to take you to write the different sections of the grant and have those milestones just for you, right? You also need to factor in time for other people to provide feedback and for you to be able to incorporate that feedback, right? So if you're developing a timeline that gets you to your submission deadline and you haven't left any room for feedback or revising and editing, that's no bueno, right? You want to make sure that you are incorporating feedback and revision and your own sort of critique of your writing in that timeline, because that's going to produce a much better application. Okay. And finally, again, on that point is revision and editing. So we need to make sure that there's time for feedback, and you want to make sure that that's built in sort of throughout the grant writing process. But you also want to make sure that you have ample time to revise and edit your application, because ultimately what is going to make the difference between getting discussed and not, and even getting funded and not, is around clarity and simplicity of how you communicate the value of your research. And so if you're just throwing something together that is incoherent even to you, that is not going to lead to the results that you are hoping for, right? The best grants are the ones that are clear and simple and persuasive and exciting. And to be able to do that well takes a lot of revision and editing and putting yourself in your reviewer's shoes. And that ultimately takes time and space, right? So going back to our very first point. So I hope that all of those points will stir up something new in you around how you can optimize your planning for your next R01 so that you can get the kind of results that you are after. And if you found this video helpful, I strongly encourage you to sign up for our free resource library. The link for that is in the video description. And in our free resource library, we have lots of different tools and tutorials to help you write a stronger NIH grant. So again, you can access that in the video description and go ahead and sign up. It's absolutely free, and I'll see you next time.